Quarter of all Italians alive today live in cities the Etruscans founded. Rome itself was built following Etruscan rituals. Its last kings weren't even Roman, they were Etruscan. So why has almost nobody heard of them? Rome copied their government, their army, their religion, even their alphabet. The English words you're reading right now trace back through Latin to an Etruscan script. Even the name Sergio is Etruscan, from the noble Sergius family. But who actually were these people? Where did they come from? And why did an entire civilization that shaped Rome disappear almost without a trace? Let's dig in. Where did they come from? The ancient historian Herodotus had a theory. The Etruscans were migrants from Lydia, in modern-day Turkey, and there's real evidence for it, striking parallels between Etruscan culture and the ancient Near East. But the theory has problems. If they arrived by sea, why isn't there a single Etruscan settlement on the coast? And if they were foreign newcomers, why did they borrow the Greek alphabet instead of bringing their own writing system with them? Modern DNA studies make things even messier. They show the ancestors of the Etruscans split from the people of Asia Minor thousands of years before Etruscan civilization even existed, back in the Neolithic period. A different historian, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, argued the opposite. The Etruscans were native Italians. For centuries, this was dismissed as flattery. Emperor Augustus's family claimed Etruscan roots, so, of course, a Roman-era historian would say they were the real Italians. But today, the evidence backs them up. Etruscan culture looks like a direct evolution of the earlier Iron Age Villanovan culture. In fact, archaeologists can barely tell a late Villanovan grave from an early Etruscan one. The only real giveaway is writing. Inscription, Etruscan, no inscription, Villanovan. Other theories, an origin in the Alps or on the island of Sardinia, don't hold up well. Etruscan expansion moved from Tuscany toward the Alps, not the other way around. And Sardinia's famous stone towers, the Nuraghi, have no equivalent anywhere on the Italian mainland. The most convincing picture, the Etruscans grew directly out of the local Villanovan culture, then got reshaped through centuries of contact, and probably intermarriage, with Phoenician and Greek traders. Even Roman legend hints at this blending. King Tarquinius Priscus was said to be half Etruscan, half Greek. And it's not a coincidence that Villanovan culture started transforming into what we call Etruscan in the 9th and 8th centuries BC, exactly when Greek and Phoenician ships first started showing up on Italian shores. The most convincing picture, the Etruscans grew directly out of the local Villanovan culture, then got reshaped through centuries of contact, and probably intermarriage, with Phoenician and Greek traders. Even Roman legend hints at this blending. King Tarquinius Priscus was said to be half Etruscan, half Greek. And it's not a coincidence that Villanovan culture started transforming into what we call Etruscan in the 9th and 8th centuries BC, exactly when Greek and Phoenician ships first started showing up on Italian shores. A language nobody can fully read. Here's what makes the Etruscans so mysterious. We still can't fully read their language. They wrote using Greek letters, and every year somebody claims to have finally cracked the code. Sometimes a serious academic, sometimes a fringe theorist online. The problem? None of these decoded translations agree with each other. Here's what we actually do know. Etruscan isn't an Indo-European language. It's unrelated to Latin, Greek, English, or basically anything else you've heard of. It's agglutinative, meaning words are built by stringing together roots and endings like linguistic Lego bricks. Around 400 words have been identified with any real confidence. Beyond that, we're mostly guessing. The bigger problem is we don't have much to work with. Thousands of inscriptions survive, but nearly all of them are short and repetitive. Tombstones that just say, "Here lies Sergio," or offerings like, "I, Sergio, dedicate this to the god Tinia." Only 8 known Etruscan texts run longer than 50 words. The most valuable of them all is the Liber Linteus, the linen book, and its survival story is bizarre. In the 19th century, a Croatian officer bought a mummy in Egypt as a souvenir. It ended up in a museum in Zagreb, where researchers noticed writing on the linen wrappings, writing nobody could identify for decades. In the early 1900s, someone finally recognized it, Etruscan. Somehow, an Etruscan religious text had traveled to Egypt, where an embalmer cut it into strips and repurposed it as mummy bandages. It turned out to be a ritual calendar, full of gods' names and recurring ceremonies. We still haven't fully translated it. There was one more moment of hope. In 1961, archaeologists found the Pyrgi tablets, thin gold sheets inscribed in both Etruscan and Phoenician, a potential Rosetta Stone. Except the 2 texts aren't a direct word-for-word translation. The Etruscan version is much longer, which limits how much it actually teaches us. 2 other languages might be Etruscan's distant cousins. The language of the Radian tribes in the Alps, and a language once spoken on the Greek island of Lemnos. Ancient Greeks even used the same word, tirsanoi, for both the Lemnians and the Etruscans. Trouble is, we understand those 2 languages even less than we understand Etruscan itself. from farming villages to fortified cities. Around the 12th century BC, a wave of migration called the Urnfield culture swept into Italy, possibly the deep roots of what would become Etruscan civilization. In Italy, historians call this phase Proto-Villanovan, its signature trait, cremating the dead and storing their ashes in urns shaped like two cones joined together. By the 10th century BC, this had evolved into the Villanovan culture proper. Small communities of a few thousand people built on defensible hilltops, still practicing cremation burial. As populations grew, so did inequality. You can see it in the graves. Some are simple, others are stuffed with weapons, ritual objects, and fine pottery. Then around 800 to 700 BC, the Villanovans started trading directly with Greeks and Phoenicians. Food and iron ore going out, luxury goods, bronze, and fine pottery coming in. This is exactly when written Etruscan inscriptions start appearing. The language was almost certainly older. It just hadn't been written down yet, or nothing written has survived. Burial customs shifted too, from cremation to full burial of the body, a clear marker of the Villanovan world giving way to the fully formed Etruscan civilization. Hilltop villages grew into fortified cities on plateaus and mountaintops, art, wealth, and a reputation for scandal. Early Etruscan art copied the Greeks. Then, in the 6th century BC, the Persian Empire invaded Ionia, and a wave of Greek refugees fled west, many settling in Etruria. Their arrival supercharged Etruscan craftsmanship. By the end of that century, Etruscan pottery was so close to Greek work that only mineral analysis of the clay can tell them apart. The Etruscans also developed their own signature style. Bucero, a glossy black pottery made by mixing soot into the clay, then polishing it until it gleamed like metal. Greeks and Romans both loved to gossip about how decadent the Etruscans supposedly were. The real reason? Etruscan women had unusually high status. They dined and drank wine alongside men, which scandalized the more rigid patriarchal Romans. In reality, Etruscan art isn't any more erotic than Greek art of the same era. The Etruscans also loved music and dancing, activities stern early Romans considered borderline indecent. Even eating 2 or 3 hot meals a day instead of the single frugal meal Romans prided themselves on added to their reputation for excess. Whatever you think of the gossip, their craftsmanship was genuinely extraordinary. One surviving pendant depicts the river god Achelous with a beard made of individual gold grains, each under half a millimeter wide. That's goldsmithing at a level most modern jewelers would struggle to match. Their tombs were just as impressive. Essentially full-scale houses built for the dead, painted with elaborate murals, packed with everything the deceased might need in the afterlife, and covered with an earthen mound. Pirates, warships, and an empire without unity. The Etruscans fought constantly, against neighbors and against each other, but rarely to conquer territory. Mostly they wanted cattle, harvests, prisoners, and trophies. They were also pirates. By the 7th century BC, Etruscan raiding along Italy's west coast had gotten so aggressive that Greek and Phoenician ships avoided the area entirely, sticking closer to Sicily and Sardinia. Part of the reason. The Etruscans are credited with inventing the naval ram, a heavy bronze spike mounted on a ship's bow, which turned their fast 50-oar warships into genuine maritime threats. At their peak, Etruscan influence stretched down the Tyrrhenian coast, north into the Po Valley, and even onto Corsica. By the late 7th century BC, Etruscan kings ruled Rome itself. Ancient sources hint that Rome functioned almost like an Etruscan client city, with its kings acting more like appointed governors. Rome absorbed an enormous amount from this period. Political structure, crafts, and artistic tradition all owe something to Etruscan influence. By 500 BC, Etruscan civilization had reached its peak. Then the decline began. Gods, omens, and the art of reading a liver. According to Etruscan belief, their religious knowledge came from a strange being named Tagus, described as a bearded infant with the wisdom of an old man, who emerged from a freshly plowed furrow. Tagus supposedly dictated 5 sacred books covering ritual and divination. Their pantheon lines up neatly with the gods you already know. Tinia, thunder, equivalent to Zeus, Jupiter. Uni, his wife, who became the Roman Juno. And Minerva, wisdom, equivalent to Athena, Minerva. They also worshipped Aplu, essentially the same figure as Apollo, though Apollo himself may have originally come from the Near East, possibly borrowed from a Hittite deity with a similar name. Their goddess of fertility, Turan, is roughly Rome's Venus. Divination wasn't a side detail of Etruscan religion. It was central to it. They read omens in animal entrails, the flight patterns of birds and lightning strikes, and no major decision, political, military, or personal, got made without consulting the signs. Bad omens meant the plan was scrapped, no matter how important it was. Each method had its own specialist. Augurs read birds, fulgurators read lightning, and haruspices, considered the most authoritative of all, read entrails. Their signature ritual involved sacrificing a black ram, extracting and boiling its liver, then examining it section by section, each part linked to a specific god. Any unusual spot or growth was read as a direct message from the divine. The fall. If you had to sum up why Etruscan civilization collapsed in one word, it would be disunity. There was never a central Etruscan state, just independent cities that refused to act as one, even when facing a shared existential threat. Around 500 BC, Rome overthrew its last Etruscan king, Tarquinius Superbus, and every later Etruscan attempt to retake the city failed. Not long after, the Greeks pushed the Etruscans out of the Tyrrhenian Sea entirely, sealed by a decisive naval defeat at Cumae in 474 BC, after which the Greeks controlled western Mediterranean trade. Rome kept expanding north. In 396 BC, it captured Veii, at the time one of the largest cities in Europe, with a population estimated around 400,000. Then, in 387 BC, Gallic invaders swept through Etruria, sacking Rome and several Etruscan cities on the way. For most of the 4th century BC, Rome and the Etruscan cities fought almost constantly, and every round pushed Rome's border further north. Yet the Etruscans never truly united against Rome. Some cities even allied with Rome against their own Etruscan neighbors. By the time they attempted a real military alliance at the very end of the century, it was already too late. By the early 3rd century BC, most Etruscan cities were effectively client states of Rome, and they adapted quickly, offering little resistance. When Hannibal invaded Italy, hoping the recently conquered Etruscans would rise up against Rome, not a single city joined him. They never really vanished. Many Etruscans became Roman citizens and rose to real power. At least 2 Roman consuls were of Etruscan descent. In 27 BC, the people of Etruria became the first non-Roman Italians granted full Roman citizenship. Etruscan blood ran through the empire itself. Several emperors, including Augustus, traced their ancestry to Etruscan families. Emperor Claudius was so fascinated by Etruscan history that he wrote a 20-volume history of their civilization. Tragically, every copy has been lost. We only know it existed because later writers mention it. By the 2nd century AD, the Etruscan language had gone silent, and its people had fully blended into Roman society. But genetically, they didn't disappear. DNA studies show that Tuscans, as late as the 15th century, were still direct descendants of the ancient Etruscans. They make one final eerie appearance in the historical record in 410 AD. As the Gothic King Alaric laid siege to Rome, the desperate city prefect and Pope Innocent III turned to the last practicing Etruscan haruspices, asking for one final reading of the omens. The answer was grim: Rome would fall. It did. A civilization that gave Rome its alphabet, its religion, and even its kings. And we still can't fully read what they wrote about themselves. If you want to actually crack open one of those untranslated inscriptions with me, or find out what other lost languages we still haven't deciphered, hit subscribe. There's more of this coming every week. And if you want to go further behind the scenes, our Patreon gets you early access to new episodes and work-in-progress updates. Every bit of support keeps this channel going. See you in the next one.